There we go.
We can see you and hear you now, Kim.
Excellent. I'm so sorry about this. My building is not wired for fiber op, which means that I'm on the good old reliable, Wi-Fi. So I've sat myself closer to the modem, so hopefully that's going to help. Which also means my cat may join us. So you may see him because I'm on the couch, which means he has to sit next to me, of course. So people can log back in. If you know anybody who's logged out wants to come back, let them know. We'll give them a couple minutes. As I said, my apologies for these technical difficulties.
I think everybody's there now, Kim, because
Okay.
I asked everybody to log out and everybody did, and I think there were 13 and now there's 13 again. So I think we're good.
Excellent. Okay. So as I said, my apologies for this. Oh, someone's trying to get back in. Hold on a second. Share screen. Share. Okay, so you guys should be able to see my desktop.
Good.
So how this is going to work is there is a chat box. As I'm showing my screen, I can't see it at the moment, so I will try to answer questions at the end. Everybody should be on mute, so if you have a question that I'm not explaining things very well, please let me know, and I can go over that as well. Hold on, this also means that I can't see my mouse. This is great. This is a great Wednesday, everybody. Share. I want to stop. Oh, my apologies for all these technical difficulties. Of course, when you want it to work, it does not work. Can I stop share? Escape. Why do we also see that? Great. Share. Okay. I think I have it figured out. This is all new to me. I apologize for our technical difficulties. We will get this underway. If you see me looking down, I'm just looking at my speaker notes as they are on my phone. This is also being recorded, so I can send this out to people who are unable to attend later. And if anybody would like to rewatch this, please let me know and I can send you the recording as well. I will try to cut out the part where I logged back in and went through everything. So thank you for joining us. This is the first in a series of 3 webinars that the Council of Archives will be holding. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kim. I'm the Archives Advisor for the Council of Archives New Brunswick. I would like to thank everybody who sent in suggestions for these webinars. If there is any other webinar topics you would like to see us cover, please let me know and we can certainly work that in. If we keep getting a lot of interest, we could possibly look at having a more regular program of webinars as well. So that's great. So today's topic is on accessioning and the new archival accessioning standard that came out in May of last year. So for some of us on this call, some of the accessioning stuff is things that we know, but for those of you who don't, or a refresher is always great. So we're going to go over kind of what is accessioning, the process of accessioning, what an accession form is, assigning accession numbers, and then finally the new Canadian Archival Accession Information Standard. So as I said, some of this is going to be old news to some of you and new news to others, and then the accession standard will be new as well. So what is accessioning? The Canadian Archival Accession Standard defines it as the physical and legal addition of predominantly unpublished documentary material to an archival repository's holding. Now that is a very archival definition of accessioning. I know many on this call are also in a museum setting. So accessioning applies to the same thing. We would just replace predominantly unpublished material with artifacts that are important to the museum. It's the same concept. Accessioning archival material is really no different than accessioning artifacts. When you accession material into your collections or your holdings, your institution now gains legal control over that material. And the act of accessioning is important because if there are any legal challenges to the ownership of the records, you have proof showing your institution has ownership over the records. This also needs to be paired with some form of documentation showing the records being transferred, donated, or purchased into your institution. So those two documents together allow for a really strong legal case to show that, yes, we own it. If somebody in the future comes along and says, no, we did not give it to you, we want it back, you actually have a legal footing to stand on. It also allows you to gain physical control over the records because of the information that is gathered during the accessioning process. So by physical control, I mean you have given the records an accession number, you know where the records are located, you know the extent or the volume of the records that you have, the number of boxes, and you have some idea of what information is in the records. Some people would describe this as you have a basic handle on the records. It's not described yet, but you have a good sense of what's in there, where it is, how much you have, which is just as important as the legal material, because for future planning, when you're looking at planning for a year, then you can say, this accession has X number of boxes, it's going to take us this long to process it. So it really helps with that as well. So the process of accessioning. You're probably most likely going to get records either through donation, transfer, or purchase. These are probably the three most common ways that institutions in New Brunswick are going to get records. I'm only going to describe these three methods of acquiring records. There are other ways, for example, bequests and whatnot, but the process is relatively the same for most types of records. As I said earlier, the method of acquisition combined with the process of accessioning results in your institution having full legal ownership over the records. Records can come to your institution in other ways, but for this webinar, as I said, I will only cover the three most common ways. Before you accession records, it's important that records should not be accessioned into the collection until a deed of gift, a transfer form, or a bill of sale has been completed and received. And this goes for any method of acquisition. You need some form of documentation that says, we, the first owner, are now giving you ownership of these records. As I said, it's in the event of there's any form of legal challenge, or somebody walks in off the street and says, my family did not give you that. Well, in fact, somebody was authorized to give us these records. This actually happened to me in a museum setting as a student. When I worked in Sussex at a museum, somebody came in and said, these artifacts that my family donated to you, no, I want those back. We did not legally give them to you. I was a student, so I said I would get back to you. And after going back and looking at the deed of gift in the accession information, the family member who had donated the records was the original owner's wife, and she was the executor of the estate, and she had the legal authority to give us this material. She signed the deed of gift. It was already accessioned, so it was all above board, and this other person who came in did not have a legal footing to stand on. So that is an example of why accessioning is so important. As well as also getting the records that show that you have now gained legal ownership. So the process for donated material, I'm going to say it works in a linear way, but we all know it doesn't work in a linear way. What happens most likely is a donor approaches your institution with records saying they would like to donate them. You or somebody at your institution decides that the records meet your institution's mandate. You then write the donor a deed of gift and have them sign it. The deed of gift, as I have said, is what transfers ownership of the records to your institution. Once the deed of gift is signed, then you can actually complete the accession process. For transfer material, what I'm talking about is either a parent institution or another body that is related to your archives just transfers the records from one department to the other. So as an example, if you are an archive for an organization, I know the Girl Guides aren't on this phone call, but I'll use them as an example. So the Girl Guide Archive in St. John, they take records from the New Brunswick Girl Guides and they just get transferred to their institutional archive. So it is a donation, but it's a transfer among departments. So they just need a transfer form because it's only being transferred internally, but you still need that form to show that those records have actually been handed over to the archive and that there is a record of that happening. So when you do the transfer, you need to have the form. Once you have the form and the records, then you can go along with the accession process. Purchase. Some archives and museums may choose to purchase records as well. If you purchase the records, you need to make sure you get a bill of sale or a receipt, something showing that you have purchased these records legally. And then once you receive the records and the bill of sale, then you can proceed with accessioning the records. During the acquisition process, or more particularly in terms of when a donor is approaching your institution, you want to ask the donor or the depositor what they would like done with the records your institution does not wish to keep. When you begin processing records, you will come across records that your institution does not want, and the depositor needs to choose how they want those records to be dealt with, whether they want the unwanted records to be returned, or whether they want you as the institution to dispose of those records. By having this decision recorded both on the deed of gift and in the accession form, then you have a legal footing to stand on if the depositor says, I didn't authorize you to do X with the records that I did not want. So maybe they wanted the records destroyed and you have the deed of gift saying, yes, I authorize your institution to destroy unwanted records. And then if they turn around and say, sorry, I know it's been 5 years, but I want those destroyed records back. Sorry, at the time of donation, you said that you wanted them destroyed. We have on the deed of gift that you signed that you would like us to destroy those records. So we went with your wishes at that time. It just gives you a legal footing. All of this is to protect your institution and your records. So I might sound like I am beating a bit of a dead horse there, but it is important because we want to protect our institutions. So assigning accession numbers. So each donation, transfer, purchase, or records that your institution acquires, it receives its own unique accession number. An accession number is a two-part number. I do know for museums, they tend to be 3 parts or more, but for archives, they tend to be 2-part. And it's a combination of the year the material was received, and then whatever number of acquisition it was that year. So for example, the accession number 2019.20 means records were received in 2019, and the 20 means it was the 20th donation, transfer, purchase of that year. So the number that you use is just sequential. So in January, we start new with 2020.01. The next donation, transfer, purchase is 2020.02, so on and so forth. It is both easy to remember the system, and it means that you won't duplicate numbers, hopefully. If you are worried about duplicating numbers, you can just keep a running list on a computer somewhere saying this is the next accession number that we're going to use. That would work really well if you have a lot of students accessioning records as well. And as I said, this method ensures that all donation, transfers, and purchase receive their own unique accession number. Accession numbers allow you to track the records until they are properly processed, and they also continue to connect the records to the acquisition information after processing. So, my apologies, the accession number, even though it will not be used to identify the records forever, the accession number will always be attached to those records. So you might have your own unique numbering system. I know at the Provincial Archives for private records, they use an MC number. So all following collections are known as MC and then a number after that. But the records may be known for the rest of their lives as that MC number there, but the accession number is always attached to those records. And it's the accession number that attaches the records to their actual paperwork, which is really important because there's no point in doing all this paperwork to accession the records if we're never going to connect the records back to it. And when you acquire material, it's most likely going to be in a box. Sometimes it comes in a garbage bag. Those garbage bag donations, we will put them in a box and we will put the accession number on the outside of the box because this makes sure that we can see, oh yes, these are all the boxes for 2019.20 accession, just write it on the outside with a pencil or a Sharpie, just in a way that you're able to actually see the number and identify it. So the accession form gathers all the preliminary information about the records so you can gain physical and legal control over them. Accession forms are generally digital, but they can also be integrated into a collections management database as well. You can also print them off if you want to have a backup paper copy as well. That is also done. If you choose to have digital accession records, either in a database or just in some type of file plan, make sure you back those up regularly and store a copy offsite or in the cloud or someplace where, you know, if anything was ever to happen to your computer system, you have a copy of all your accession information. So the way that accession records gain physical and legal control is in the ways I have described on the slide. So physical control, what you're gathering is I said extent, the dates of the material, so the oldest piece in the collection or fall to the newest piece, and the location where those records are stored, because that's really important too. We want to be able to go back and find these records so we can process them. In legal control, the accession form has the date of the donation, transfer, purchase, however you acquired them, the information about the depositor. That is so important that you have their contact information. So if you're processing the records, you can call them back up again and say, I have a question about the records. Like, do you have a moment to answer them? Or send an email, what have you. You also record basic information about the contents of the records. It's just a preliminary scoping content. The depositor most likely knows somewhat about the records, so they would be able to tell you some information about them. And then the custodial history, you know, does the donor know how the records went from the person or entity that created them all the way through time to your door at this moment. The description of the records is super important, as I said, both for planning future processing, but also in case of a legal challenge. If you have the records described, you know, the extent, the dates, about the content, you can identify that, yes, these are the records that are described in the accession form. As I said, if your institution does not have a database that allows accession forms to be stored in it, then you'll need a dedicated computer folder to store the accession forms in. I personally would recommend having an accession forms folder on your computer or network, cloud, what have you. And within that folder have a subfolder for each year. And each accession form should be saved within the year that it was accessioned in. So for example, 2019 would have all the 2019 accession forms. And an easy way to number the accession forms is with the accession number, obviously, and then maybe a brief descriptor of the records, like, you know, the John Smith fall or the John Smith curl, whatever works for your institution. As I said, you may choose to have both physical and digital records. In the event of an emergency, physical copies of accession records can also be helpful for storing like the actual signed deed of gift and other related documentation regarding the records in one place. You can also keep it digitally. We're really just trying to make sure that we have all the information we need somewhere in 2 different places or 3 different places in the event of an emergency. Hopefully you'll never have to access the backups, but you know, it's like an insurance policy. You have it and you hope you never use it. As I said, digital accession records should be routinely backed up to a hard drive or other type of digital storage service in the event of a computer failure. So moving on for the bit I'm sure you were all here for, and not listening to me go over accession information, which, as I said, I'm sure most of you know. We're here to talk about the Canadian Archival Accession Information Standard. So at the very end of my actual slide presentation, I will pull up the PDF of what CAAIS actually looks like, and we can take a look at that as well. So the Canadian Archival Accession Information Standard, or CAAIS as I will refer to it for the rest of this presentation, the concept for it began in 2013, and it was released in May of 2019. So it was created for kind of 3 reasons, and the actual PDF goes through and explains these reasons in much more detail if you're interested in them. So the first was for database developers to create accession records functions. CAAIS essentially creates a shared language around accessioning. So one institution may refer to certain parts of the accession process differently than another institution. And for database developers, this is really confusing because they don't necessarily know that these 2 terms are the same. So if we have a shared language, it's very easy for them. It was also a way for archivists to adapt paper-based workflows to digital records by having that shared language as well. And they also view it for the potential for sharing some accession information with the public or between other institutions. Obviously, if you're sharing accession information, we do not want to be sharing like privacy, we don't want to be breaking privacy law, but some of it may be useful. The really important part about CAAIS is it does not change accessioning. We're not looking at completely changing the process of accessioning whatsoever. It just standardizes the terms used to talk about accessioning, and it ensures that all relevant information is being captured about the records. When I go through the sections of CAAIS, the wording is very, very vague, mainly to create this shared language, but it's really information that you should already, or most likely already are capturing. So CAAIS is organized into 7 different sections. I'm going to go through each of these sections individually. As I said, the titles are quite vague, just to create that shared language. And each section is further subdivided into different elements and sub-elements, which we will go through. How CAAIS is organized is how you would kind of naturally go about collecting information about the records. So going from information about the source to the records, where those records are located, so on and so forth. Certain elements within CAAIS are considered to be mandatory, and I have bolded those on each of the slides to make it really easy to see. The bold information is the absolute minimum amount of information you need to collect about the records. I highly, highly recommend collecting more information than just the bare minimum, because the bare minimum will give you just legal control and just physical control, but where the rest of the information will give you a richer idea of the records themselves. So the first one is the information identity section. So this is information that identifies the records. This includes the accession number, which is super important, the title of the records. The title may end up changing for whatever reason. A note if the records are an accrual, and if so, what font or collection they are joining, and the acquisition method. As I said, this is information that will help us identify the records. And as I've said before, accession numbers should be written on the outside of the box once the records have been received by your institution. The reason we want to know how the records came to your institution is because it will then connect back to your deed of gift, your transfer form, or your receipt. for those of you who don't know or don't receive a lot of accruals, an accrual is material that is added to an existing collection. This is really common for organizations that are currently operating. So if you have a relationship with a community organization or a business, as an example, that is still operating, maybe every 5 years they bring in new records. And every time they bring in new records, they get a new accession number because it's a new accession, a new set of records coming into your collection, into your institution, but they will ultimately be joining the main font or collection that they belong to. So it's important for people researching these records to know that, yes, these records came in over a number of years, different accessions, these are the different accession numbers. For some researchers, that information may be really important. And as I said, it's really important for gaining legal control as well. The next section is source information section. So this is information about the donor, the depositor, the transfer, the place you bought it from, the seller, whoever. And this includes the type of source. Were they a person, a family, a corporate body, an organization? Because if you ever have questions about the records, it's really important to know if you're calling up a single person or you're calling a business, because that might change how you deal with them or the length of time it's going to take for people to get back to you. You want to know the name of the source. So what's the name of the person who brought the records in? What is the name of the business? If you're working with a corporate body or an organization, you want to know the name of the organization or the business. Then you want to know the person who brought it to you, physically brought it to you, and what their position is within the organization or the corporate body. Because most likely that will be the person you're going to contact about the records. And as I just said about contacting, you want their contact information. So you want to know their phone number, their email, and which of those two is the best way to contact them. You may also want to know if they're from out of town. Maybe for some reason you're getting records from somebody out in BC. It's really important to know that they're in British Columbia. So if you have to call them up at 9 in the morning to ask them a question about the records, you don't want to be calling them at 9 in the morning Atlanta, because that's going to be quite early in British Columbia. You'd want to call them at a much nicer time. So that's important as well. We also want to know how the source acquired the records. So this is really important because we want to know how they got the records. So this really helps provide authenticity to the records. So if they just said that, oh yeah, these are the records of my great-grandfather, then they went to my grandfather and then to my father and then to me, we have a whole chain of custody for those records. And we have very good evidence that those records are authentic. Same with a business. Yeah, these are records from our business. We kept them in the basement. We've now decided to give them to the archive. And then that's also part of the preliminary custodial history as well. So we want to know how the source got the records themselves. I got these records from my father. Great. Then we want to know the whole chain of custody as well. So materials information section. So this is information about the records. And this includes the dates of the material. So not the date the records came to you, but the dates that are within the records. So what is the oldest piece in the Faulkner collection and what is the newest piece? Do you see any predominant dates? Does it really cover a wide range of dates, or is it quite narrow? You can gather rough dates from the source, and then you can confirm those dates or get better dates as you work through the material. And then we want to record the extent and the type of material. So the extent is always measured in metric. We live in Canada and we use the metric system. Even though some things might come out to a really nice foot, unfortunately we do live in Canada, so the metric system is what we use here. And when we pick a unit of measurement, we want to pick a unit of measurement that makes sense for the volume of records. So if you only have a couple centimeters of records, it makes sense to measure those in centimeters instead of meters. As a professor once said to me, it would be really silly to measure canoe in millimeters, right? We want to measure canoe in meters. So look at the volume of records that you have and pick the unit that would be the most appropriate. And then type of material, we want to know, is it all paper-based in terms of the records, like textual records? Are there photographs in there as well? Is there maps and plans, audiovisual material? We want to know that because it may help us determine how we're going to go about processing the records. If we have audiovisual material that is on an obsolete format, we're going to want to look at that. Do we need specialized equipment? Do we need to contract somebody? All that information. We also might have to put that in different storage. So it's all information we want to collect. And then we want some type of information about the information that is contained in the records. As I said, the source probably has some idea of what the records contain as far as information. You should also take a preliminary look at the records to confirm that, yes, this is the type of information that is actually contained in these records. Because if you're getting a donation from somebody that says, oh yeah, this is all records from a store that my family owned, but it turns out to be records from something else, we would want to know that. Also as well, if there is photographs in the donation or transfer, what have you, of people or places, you should ask the donor, depositor, whoever, if they know the people in the images. And if they're able to identify them, record who the people are, because it's always better to have identified people in places than, you know, photo of valley or unidentified photo of woman with dog. Right, so if we're able to put names to faces, it's always better. And you can also ask the donor, depositor, whoever, if they would be okay with you contacting them in the future to get that information as well. So the management information section. So this is information about the actual management of the records. So how your institution is, you know, managing them. So we want to know the storage location. Are they kept like in the vault? Is there a processing room that they're kept in? We want to know where the records are. So when we go to process them or look at them, we know where they are kept. We want to know any rights associated with the records as well. And is there any copyright, access, restrictions, whatnot? And copyright restrictions and access should be discussed with the source to determine if any rights apply to the records at the time of donation, transfer, what have you. This is important information to gather as it can greatly impact how the records will be used by the public. During the time of donation is when you should be speaking to the source about access and restrictions, as any requirements they may want to put in place to the records may change your decision on accepting the records. So if the donor or depositor transfer person wants a really unreasonable restriction on the records to be put, you might say, I'm sorry, we're not able to meet that restriction, or, you know, we can meet that restriction. So it's super important to know. So when you process the records, you can put in the finding aid, these records are restricted. Here's the restriction times. Copyright is also important to determine, because if somebody wants to use the records in a publication or some other form, we need to know who to ask about copyright as well. I'm no expert on copyright. And that's always a minefield, as we all know when it comes to copyright. So we also want to know the preservation requirements. So if you're getting records that have mold on them, we want to put in that they have mold, how we're going to deal with that. We also want to know, like, are they crumbling and falling apart? Because that may determine that we need to set them to conservation or preservation. So this is just all information that helps with the management of the records. We also want to know any associated documents, like the deed of gift, the transfer form, the finding aid, what have you. Because information, so for information regarding the records, the accession record will be the first place that people will probably look. And the accession record will point them to these other forms of documentation as well. Event information section. So this is information about actions taken by staff or volunteers as part of the accessioning process. So this section is really asking you to record what steps you have taken to accession the records. And also includes things like Did you accession the records? Did you get a deed gift signed? Did you rebox the records? Anything you do to the records as part of kind of their processing. We want to know the date or dates that this happens on as well, and we want to know who carried it out. We want to record anything that is done to the record, so there is a timeline and record of what has been done. This is important for both tracking workflow, and as well it provides a chain of events of what has been done to the records in the event that someone questions what has been done to them or what hasn't been done to them. I'm not entirely sure how often this would happen, but better to record it than not. And then a general information section. This is really information, a place where you can put information about the records that has not appeared in any of the previous sections. I'm not entirely, can't think of an example off the top of my head that would go in this section, but it is there in the event that you need it. The final section of CAAIS is the control information section. So this is documents when the accession record was created and any changes to the accession record over time. So we want to know, obviously, the date the accession record was created, what dates it has been revised on, and who has carried out that revision. So this is just a quick explanation of what CAAIS actually is, and really the highlights of the information that it's asking you to collect. As I said, going through it, hopefully the information that it wants is all very familiar to people. As I said, it does not change accessioning in any way, shape, or form. What it really does is it gives us a common language, but then also it makes sure that we're collecting this information together. So what we're looking at now is the actual PDF of the Canadian Archival Accession Information Standard. We can see that it's 61 pages. Please do not be frightened of the high page count for this. I know I just summed that all up in a very short number of slides. So if we look through it quite quickly, there is a very brief introduction to the standard, the why the standard and the how of why it was developed. They are working on revising these standards because during this process they realized that these standards are imperfect, and there is still other issues surrounding accessioning that don't quite fit into this accession standard, so there will most likely be an updated version in the future. And then it goes through the organization of how CAAIS is organized. And I ordered my presentation around how CAAIS itself is organized. So if we go down to page 10, this is a quick summary of the information that CAAIS asks for. And it has the element name, which is what how they choose to list each piece essentially of the accession standard and the information you collect. The obligation, whether it is mandatory, whether it is optional. Repeatable, this is just if you need to repeat this information in other places within the record. And then the definition, it's a really quick definition of the information that they're looking for in each of these sections. If we continue to scroll down to section 3 on page 14, the information element of the accession record. So this is just a much deeper dive into what each section of CAAIS is asking for. So under information identity section, repository, that's optional. It's probably on your letterhead or somewhere in the accession record embedded. As an example, it gives us the definition, it gives us the purpose, it gives us whether or not it is mandatory. Once we have it on there, we don't need to repeat it ever again in the accession record, implementation guidelines, and then examples. And CAAIS does this for every single element that it asks for. So if we go back up to page 10, there is 1, 2, 3, 4 pages of just a very quick brief of what each element and sub-element is, and then all of CAAIS goes into a much deeper dive. So if anybody is looking for more information and more detailed information about each of these elements, CAAIS has it in there. But what's really nice about CAAIS, scroll down to the end, is Appendix B has a sample accession form. I am assuming that most places have an accession form of some type. This sample accession form is really great if you're looking to kind of revamp your accession form, or if you want to revamp it with the terms that CAAIS uses. It is, I think it might be fillable. I haven't checked that out, but it is there as an example and a template for your institution to use. It goes through each of the sections like one by one, starting at the first section to the second section, and so on and so forth. I do know that accession records for museums can be slightly different. They ask for slightly different information. So you could take the two if you're an institute, if you are a museum archive institution, and kind of marry them together if you want. And it just gives you an example of how everything is laid out itself. So that is the new accession standard in kind of a nutshell. It is available in both French and English, and I will show you where it is on the Canadian. I'm going to move this down so I can see my work bar. So it's available on Archives Canada through the Canadian Council of Archives for anybody who's looking for the PDF. It is a little bit hidden. So if we are on Archives Canada's website under Canadian Council of Archives, if we go to CCA committees and working groups, there is one for accession standards. And this is what comes up, the National Archival Accession Standards Working Group. And if we go to documents, this is CAAIS right there. I would take you all through the actual step-by-step, but I'm worried that's going to cause my internet to get lost again. So I won't take you through step-by-step, but that is where it actually is located on their website if anybody's looking for it. And as I said, it's available in both French and English as well. So that is my presentation. I will now take any questions, comments, queries that anybody may have about CAAIS or accessioning. If I do not know the answer to your question off the top, I will get back to you through email later with the answer. So if anybody has any questions, there is the chat. You can put them into there. Or if you want, you can unmute yourself and ask as well. Okay, good question. Thank you, Evelyn. So Evelyn asked if each item in an archival collection, or in this case, an acquisition, gets its own unique number or it gets the same number. So if we are getting today a stack of records, that will get an accession number for 2020 point, what have you, 2020.15, we'll say. So it will get its own accession number, that donation in this space and time, and it will get added to either an existing collection or it will form its own collection. So if it's going to an existing collection, so say you get the records of the Women's Institute up in Kingsclear as an example, and they keep giving records every 5 years, those records for the Women's Institute up in Kingsclear will join your existing fond for the Kingsclear Women's Institute. Now, if, you know, John Smith walks in off the street and says, I would like to give you my great-grandmother's records, and you have never met this person before, they've just kind of come in, then those records will get the accession number for whatever that day is, whatever that year is, sorry, the next accession, and they will form their own collection. What is important to remember is not every piece in the donation gets its own number. Now in locations and control holdings, I'm going to go over this better in more detail. So if you are interested, please send me an email saying you want to join in on that webinar as well. So in general, not every piece of paper, every record gets its own number. Obviously, this advice does not apply to photographs, architectural drawings, maps, plans, and audiovisual material. But how I like to describe it to people is if you are in a museum setting and you have a tea set, we're going to put a number, a unique number on every single item in that tea set. So every cup, saucer, teapot, lid, spoon, what have you, gets its own number. Where at Archives, we take that whole tea set and the whole tea set gets one number on it. Which I know it seems really counterintuitive to some people, and I totally get it. It was a hard one for me to wrap my head around as well, coming from a museum background myself. But we can get into that a little bit more in locations and control holdings, because the numbers we assign to our following collections and the records within them really helps us, have locations and control holdings. So that's kind of my little quick synopsis right now. But if you are interested in knowing more, please send me an email saying you want to join that webinar as well. So we'll wait a couple more minutes to see if there's any more questions. If later in the day you have any questions about what I've said or about CAAIS, please send me an email at archives.advisor@gnb.ca and I will get back to you with the response to that. I would like to thank everybody for sitting through my technical internet difficulties. I was not expecting that to happen. My internet about 9:30 was running fine, and then for whatever reason, it decided it didn't want to work. So I really apologize for that. Hopefully in the future for the next webinar, we won't have that issue. Just a quick summary of our upcoming webinars is, let me look at my calendar, is in August, I believe it's the 19th, we're going to be doing locations and control holdings. On September 16th, we're going to be doing disaster planning. So it's going to be a really brief hour-long summary of disaster planning, emergency preparedness, which I imagine a lot of people are going to be interested in. And then just confirmed yesterday, on September 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, we will be hosting the Canadian Conservation Institute to have their digital preservation workshop virtually. So 3 days sounds a little scary, but it's only going to be a 2-hour session each day at 10 a.m. And then there's going to be homework that you need to do before each of the sessions. So if you're interested in that, please send me an email. I need a minimum of 10 people to sign up so I can, or they say they're going to sign up to confirm with CCI those dates. I need 4 more people to email me. So if you're interested in that, please send me an email and I can send you more information about that as well. I will say right now that it is not about digitization. It is about actual digital preservation, so how to preserve your digital records. Yes, and the workshop itself is free. CCI is offering it to us for free, and so we will be giving it to you for free. Also, the workshop is capped at 20 people. If we get more than 20 people who are interested in the workshop, CCI will offer it to us a second time, so more people have the option of participating as well. So if I get more than 20 people, we will have a second set of dates for those extra people who want to join us. So yes, that is it. It's really great that CCI is doing it virtually as well. I don't know if other places who are hosting CCI workshops virtually will be offering them for free as well, but please look at the list of offerings because there might be a workshop coming up in another part of the country virtually that you would be interested in attending. So please keep your eye on that as well. So if there's no more questions, I will end the webinar for today. As I said, thank you for joining me and sitting through my technical difficulties. And I want you all to have a good day. Thank you.